Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, there we go, the mic's on. How was lunch? Come on. It's getting better out there. It's hard when you have to go out and then come back in for lunch. So my name is Jon Myers. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at DeepCrawl, and I'm coming on to talk about, obviously, the aptly titled Mobile First Index, what, why, more importantly, when, in some respects. There's been an incredible amount of talk about this by Google, obviously the last sort of 18 months or so, and there's been many things sort of theorized about it, things you should do, things you shouldn't do. So I'm hopefully going to clear a few of those things up for you as we go through this deck for the next 25 minutes. When you go on Google, you can search for it. And obviously, guys, you're asking a lot of questions about it. And people are going out there to kind of try and understand, things that are happening in the dates, updates, when's it going to launch, when's it going to roll out. Quite aptly, is it the death of desktop SEO? And hopefully we can kind of put some minds at rest around that one today as well as we go through this deck. The opinions are rife. There's an incredible amount of people out there on the web. For anybody that's old enough in the audience today, if you think back to the day of the Millennium Bug and Y2K, people really are starting to jump on the bandwagon, and companies are really asking the questions within our space. There's an incredible amount of infographics out there in the open web from companies like Code Me Right talking about, is your business ready? SEMrush, is your business ready? Google itself is creating a load of content to talk about the mobile search index and thinking about it. Right through to things like the news sites like SEMpost, and notable mobile companies like Mobile Moxie and the likes of Cindy Chrome, who's been going out there and really preaching the word around mobile for about the last 10 years. It really is, in some respects for us now, nothing new. The first mention of the Google Mobile Index was in November 2016, when Gary Alls threw out this tweet and said, this is a big thing. Send us your views, ask us questions. Let us understand what you see and how we can help you communicate this to the open marketplace. So that's really been kind of going on for virtually 2 years now in some respects. They are keeping us informed. For anybody that's using GSC on a regular basis, within the Search Console, they are trying to come to the table and explain to you when you might actually see yourself switching. John Mueller came out middle of last year and said, we're not going to just hard flip this thing. It's not going to be a case where we press a red button and you move straight to the mobile index. That can't be the case. It needs to be a phased approach. So what was said in the middle of last year, which is nearly a year ago now, we're going to phase the approach. If your site is ready for mobile, we're going to move you through in batch testing into a position where we can understand whether your site works in the new mobile world, which is our index. For me, yes, I'm an SEO. I'm an extremely commercial guy as well. This staggered me in some respects. This is why we've got to sort this shit out and figure it out for ourselves. Because if something like this occurs, if your experience is rubbish on a mobile device, somebody is 60% less likely to revisit and purchase from you as a brand in the future. Imagine if you get flipped over and mobile stuff isn't ready to go as a retailer or a travel company. If this stacks up, there's a big issue out there for you guys. So as SEOs and as brand managers within, in-house, we need to kind of figure this one out together. Let's take a little trip back down memory lane. Mobile world as we view it. It's been going on for quite a long time now. So this is just a history of some of my devices that I owned over the years. Yes, it probably makes me look old. Who used to have a Spectrum 48K Spectrum? There's some people out there. You remember the rubber keys? They were great, weren't they? You just kind of, you funked out on it, kind of. You'd put your tape in, you'd go and make a cup of coffee, you'd wait 15 minutes, you'd come back, the game was still loading. God, we've moved on since then. Also, I was a graphic designer before I started in the world of digital marketing. So I did have a desktop, and that was my first laptop there on the floor there. That was 3.5 kilos. I put it in my backpack. I'd walk through London like this. Still got a bad back from it today in some respects. To moving forward to Rolls-Royce things like ThinkPads and the latest Dells that are out there in the marketplace. I'm a PC guy. I've never had an Apple. The same thing occurred with telephones. You used to kind of go downstairs and use the telephone and talk to people on the phone and arrange to go out and meet them. Then WAP-enabled phones like that little Siemens came to the table. I thought I was cool. I had a WAP phone. I could go on the internet until I got my first bill and discovered that data charges back then cost a fortune. Through the PDAs to the Rolls-Royce phones that we have today. And I think they are more than phones that we have today in some respects because they pretty much run our lives, which is a little bit scary. The same thing applies to the history of mobile within search. When we moved through WAP in 1999, through separate mobile pages. Yes, the M.dot page has been around over 10 years now. Through to responsive design, through to obviously deep app linking, and AMP, and progressive web apps, which is something which we are only really starting to talk about now. And it's been in the open marketplace for 3 years now, through to obviously the big conundrum of the mobile first index when it really started to kick in 2017. I think what's really key to call out here is the stack counter position. The inflection point in October 2016, when more internet usage was occurring on a mobile device at 51% than a desktop device. I can tell you that now, just over a year on, that is over 60% is now via a mobile device or on a desktop device. We have to take this seriously. For us as SEOs, it was the same sort of scenario. We went through the desktop scenario. We went through the mobile, the responsive, through to AMP page, and then ultimately the mobile first index. So anybody that's been an SEO for around about the last 15 years, you've kind of lived and breathed this process as much as the consumer has lived and breathed this process with technology as well. There's 3 key different types of configurations out there in the market, and we'll come on to talk about the things that you need to do and think about from a mobile indexation point of view. The key one in some respects is responsive. Google's really making a massive play for building responsive sites. Dynamic is something where we think, obviously Google has to come in and crawl with both Googlebot and obviously Smartphone Bot and look at actually what is going on the pages and make a determination. We'll talk about the varied tag later on. Or you have a completely separate desktop site to a mobile site, which there's nothing wrong with. It just means a little bit more legwork for Google in some respects. But we'll go through these one by one as we get into the presentation. So our world today, desktop. Still primarily as we stand at the moment. I think that's going to start to change and accelerate and move forward in some respects. We have the desktop page that indexes. We do straight rel alternate to the mobile page. We do rel canonical back into the desktop page to pick up all of the data and let Google be informed about the mobile page. Same process with the AMP. We do the rel alternate in for AMP, push it back into the desktop page. That's the indexable position. This will be on a dedicated site. When you think about responsive and dynamic sites plus AMP, it's a simple responsive dynamic site with a switch through the app on the same process of rel alternate through to rel canonical. So let's think about what we're doing in the world of mobile indexing. People are still massively asking the question. As I say, there's been a lot of talk about it in the last year. There's been a lot of things going on. This is Jon Myers, one of Google's webmasters. He's talked incredibly a lot about this on the open web, on videos, on Webmaster Hangouts, all over the world. Another guy who's kind of his little partner in crime in some respects is Gary Isles. He's been all over the world to conferences speaking about this, and he's made some pretty notable things which came out in some of the US conferences. Gary really has stretched the boundaries of the world to talk about this. He was last seen in Australia talking to Koala about the mobile first index. They always had a good conversation. They seemed quite happy about the process. There's also us guys who stand on stages and talk about these things as well. Certainly I know I've been talking about this for over a year now. Aleda Solis has been talking heavily about AMP in the mobile world. Bastian Grimm, who spoke earlier today, he talks a lot about site speed and the technical side of things, and Barry Adams, who really does get into the real weeds of technical SEO around mobile. Grab any of these guys' decks. This can really set you up from a point of view of what you need to think about. How Google frames it, and I think the key things to pull out of this is our algorithms will eventually primarily use mobile versions of sites. Again, they're saying eventually. It's not going to be a hard stop and a flip over to the mobile world. It has to be a test and refine process. But they call out some really interesting points around ranking and structured data, which we'll come on to talk about. But this was Google's open view on it. They're not hiding the fact. There's tools out there such as searchgoogle.com/test/mobile friendly, where you can go and bung your URL of your site into that page. It will tell you whether your site is kind of ready for mobile. So in the sense of the DeepCrawl domain name, we can push it in there and we can get back that it's friendly, thank God, in some respects. They're also giving you best practice rulings. They're telling you what's going on. They're telling you if you have desktop only, have responsive web design, if you have canonical, if you have separate URLs, dynamic serving, AMP and non-AMP. Google's giving you a lot of best practice features, which is very typically what Google will do. I'm known for Google bashing, so I'm going to try and avoid that today in some respects. So, can it really be that easy? At this point, this is where I would stop talking. But I think as SEOs, we need to challenge ourselves like we have done over the years. Google just coming out and saying, here are best practices, and these are the things that you need to do, as we see it, actually isn't in some respects what we need to do. As SEOs, we've always challenged the Google algorithm, and we've thought about ways of trying to not beat it or trick it in some respects, but try and optimize for our clients in unique ways to drive the most ROI for them as it stands for their websites as their setup stands today. Google kind of takes a broader approach to that whole thing. So I would shout that as in this world, which is mobile, we need to also do that going forward. It will not be a separate mobile index. It is one index. So they're not changing the index. The desktop doesn't go away, and there's a new completely separate mobile index, and there's a desktop index. It is one and the same. They will take this phased approach. And I think there's a great analogy that sums this up in some ways. which came from Danny Sullivan, who's obviously been around the search game for a long time, and I'm sure everybody in this room knows Danny, or has heard of Danny, who ironically now works for Google. This is a great way of putting it, to think about it as a library, where and there was one copy of every book. Initially, it was all print books, and ebooks became popular. It starts to replace the print version of the ebooks. Still one library, but a mix of books. And eventually, over time, it will become the ebooks. And I think that's how we will start to see the mobile index start to kick in and move forward, without a doubt. Desktop pages will be phased out for the mobile alternative. That is absolutely the fact. That's why you guys have got to think about how you get yourselves into a mobile-capable space as quickly as you can. And obviously, it's been the last year or so you've had the opportunities to do that. So for me, when you think about the why, in some respects, it's what do you guys then need to do to make sure that you have no performance impact? Start in the obvious place, keywords. We spend our lives in keywords. We think about keywords, we live and breathe them every day as search marketers, whether you're in SEO or whether you're in PPC. Will keywords be affected? The case is absolutely, of course it will. At the end of the day, if you have a mobile page that doesn't have the same content or contains the same pages that ranked from desktop point of view, it's going to blow it out the door. So we really need to start thinking about that. There are other areas where I believe you need to be consistent, and I will talk about them, a few of these today, but these 8 kind of call themselves out as areas to focus on and think about within actually the mobile index. Ultimately, in all of that, you must make sure that there is crawlable and indexable content. If you haven't got crawlable and indexable content, Google's not going to see you, it's not going to find you. You're effectively a black hole in some respects. So it's key in that sense. Big one for me, internal linking. When you think about how your site is pulled together, for years we've talked about the ability to make sure that your site is easily crawlable by Google. Make it simple for Google. Let them come into the site, navigate the site well, and internal linking will absolutely allow you to do that if you do it incredibly well. So there's a lot of websites out there today on the desktop version that are incredibly well optimized for internal linking. Does it need to be equivalent in the mobile world? Google's view on that is actually no. As long as it's accessible for users and search engines, they're kind of quite happy. Jon Myers came out and said it doesn't need to be the same, it should just be crawlable. I personally think there's a few things that you need to consider in that process, because just coming out and kind of saying, no, it doesn't need to be, just make it crawlable, might get you in a whole manner of shit in some respects. You could have a whole manner of orphan pages. Orphan pages are incredibly, subtly hidden within your sites. So if you're not crawling your sites and looking for orphan pages, and you've got an incredible amount of orphan pages in your mobile site, and you're not 301ing that back in well to the right pages within the process, you get an incredible amount of 404s. And also, there could be an incredible amount of increased depth within the site. Google can be lazy, so the deeper that you sit content within your site, the harder Google has to work to find it. The more time it will probably actually miss out on indexation of pages highly within the engine. So I think there really is things that you need to think around the internal linking structure and make sure that actually you're giving it parity desktop to that sort of side of things. So I'm going to call it page parity, please. Really do consider when you go away from this, if you haven't started crawling your sites and thinking about how your desktop site sits along your mobile site, you need to go and do that and look at where the given issues lie. Flipping from internal to external, Google Link Graph. It's been in place for many years. Google openly came out last year and said, we will be using link graph metrics within the new mobile world. At the end of the day, historically, you're going to have an incredible amount of links probably inbound to your desktop site, more than your AMP pages, and probably more so than your mobile pages. Google's pretty much saying that actually, as long as you've got the right rel canonical and stuff in place and alternate tags in place, they will actually mop that whole process up for you and make the link juice move around that within there. So they are going to be using the link graph metrics, but they are saying that they're going to deal with that for you. So that's a big win and a plus in a lot of respects. Structured data will play absolute vital part in this process. I think Dawn Anderson, who sits on the DeepCrawl CAB and is a very notable speaker on these sorts of things, and I suppose obviously knows how to think about this, and she summed it up really, really well. Understanding the lightweight needs of the user. We were kind of drawn towards making mobile lightweight because it's mobile. Structured data can allow you to really play a big part in that process and really allows the lightweight data to be understood quickly by the engine. And that's not just going to be simple stuff. I think you should really consider that all the way through to things like video. I mean, historically, we've kind of gone, ooh, video on a mobile. It's not for us. I think you need to think about the mobile being pretty much technically as capable as a desktop these days, or a laptop, with the same speed of connection. I mean, we're living in a 4G world. It's reasonably quick. 5G is not far away. Most places have Wi-Fi connections. So actually, I would challenge it and say, make sure that you're actually not overthinking the process in some respects. Don't strip back too far. I think if you strip back too far on mobile against desktop because you think you're kind of chasing the speed issues, I think the mobile experience will drop off, and actually you'll lose a lot out of what you could gain from actually keeping some level of page parity with Google. Which leads quite nicely into speed. Thinking about speed, it's a key thing. We want to make things quicker in the mobile world. I think it's incredibly important. This astounded me. This is some statistics from Google about page load times and how much quickly people will drop off if they don't get what they want. We live in a world where it's instantaneous, and people want to see that data incredibly quickly. So it seems that once you get to second 6, you're completely screwed. Everybody's left, according to these statistics. And I'll come on to show you somewhere benchmarking of where that sits, so bear that 6-second figure in mind. We did last year as DeepCrawl, we did crawl a lot of the majestic 1 million, top million websites in the world and looked at fetch time. So fetch time is effectively just going calling the site and pulling it back. And we saw some really interesting statistics around how that sat together. Responsive, you can see clearly between the two, it works well. This is why Google's calling out responsive a lot. Separate mobile, there's a bit of legacy and speed drop in there. But what does Google really think about that? How does Google see this today? So if we take the green one first, which is the time to first byte, which is very like fetch time as we saw it in our talk. Best practice is 1.3 seconds to grab that first piece of responsive mobile content and bring it back. As you can see, every single site category as Google sees it on the open web today is slower than what they're claiming at best practice. And then thinking about average speed of index, which is how quickly does it take to display some content, to grab the consumer's eye. Google's saying 3 seconds. As you can see, we're 6 seconds. And that previous statistic said by second 6, everybody's left anyway. Very impatient world that we live in today. Probably for me, I think where the speed issues lie is particularly in this one, which was another one which was kind of tucked away in the talk. This is the request count. So how many pieces of content does it have to pull in order to build the page for people to have that mobile experience? Best practice is 50. So you can see in the worlds of retail and travel, which are probably two of the biggest areas on the open web, it's 131 on average pieces of content that needs to be pulled to compile a mobile page. So I wonder where the speed issues lie. So this is probably something that web designers, UX guys, and us as SEOs need to think about, is how we think about that request count from a content point of view. Everybody's favorite in the world of SEO, hreflang. Took us a while to figure it out when Google first launched it. Great thing is, it seems like it's all okay. I mean, last year, Google didn't really come out and talk about this until literally PubCon, which was in November of last year, where Gary Al stood up and basically said what you needed to do. They'd kind of gone, I don't know what we're going to do with it yet. The great thing is basically just mobile to mobile, desktop to desktop, make sure it's got parity, make sure everything's in place, and the world will be a happy place. John then on to talk about, obviously, if you've got a responsive site, nothing to do, don't worry about it. Still challenge that, keep an eye on it. So when we think about quick checks, responsive sites, make sure the important resources aren't being blocked. Things like JS, CSS, images, make sure everything's running clear and running free. There will be some legacy issues which you do need to watch out for. You could have the most amazingly designed responsive site, and you might have some legacy mobile pages still sat within the site structure. You might have some dynamic pages. Google will go and index those first. So please make sure that you need to consider that and get them cleaned up and out the way in the responsive world. Dynamic sites, my big shout out here is the varied header. If you haven't heard of it, go and look it up. All you have to do is put that in place. This is it. It's one line of code. All a web dev has to do is take that piece of code, put it at the top of the site. The varied header will then allow Google to determine whether it is mobile or whether it is desktop. It's not a big ask for somebody to do that. If you haven't got that in place, please get it in place now. So when we crawled the top 1 million websites in the world at the time last year, about 90% of them didn't have it in place. Separate mobile sites, just get the 301 redirects in play. As I mentioned earlier on, think about making sure that they have content parity, mobile to desktop, and make sure if you've got any orphan pages or you want stuff to redirect in a certain way, do it in the right way. And ultimately, you'd be amazed on these three. Robot.txt files, you'd be amazed how many people haven't got those set up right to deal with mobile. Go and crawl your site, see what's getting crawled with a mobile crawler, and make you understand that whole process. And ultimately, use SEO tools that support crawling. Jon Myers came out and talked incredibly, at length about that on one of his webmaster hangouts and really forced that one home as part of the process. This is some of the DeepCrawl stuff. At the end of the day, I'm here for DeepCrawl, but there's a lot of crawlers out there on the open marketplace that allow you to see the differences between mobile and desktop. It's incredibly important to run a crawl. That would be my first starting point on any site that you run with, because it will tell you where the discrepancies are to allow you to get this stuff in play. For me, quick bit on AMP pages. Elisa talks a lot about it. AMP pages aren't just for content-based sites like The Guardian or The Telegraph anymore. They jumped on the bandwagon a couple of years ago, built a load of AMP pages because they saw that they could get content about news stories and stuff incredibly quickly into the top of Google's search results. Google is now taking things like Android Pay via AMP pages. So for e-commerce sites out there, you guys can start using this as part of the process, which means you can accelerate your position within Google's index very, very quickly with AMP. Great case study here from Event Ticket Center in the US. First two sort of scenarios around PPC, which were some amazing numbers and conversion uplift of around about 20 to 30%. But the one that really stood out for me was the organic piece. AMP pages from organic are converting 100% lift over responsive pages on the website that was indexed by Google with 10% lower bounce rate. So AMP pages really, really can help you in this new mobile world. Desktop first optimization is gone. It's not dead, like Google was claiming, but I think it's a focus of the past in some respects. Really should be thinking about mobile from a #1 priority position. So just back to one of my first slides that I put up at the start, which was slide 2, when we're talking about the different things that Google queries and search stuff for. Anybody notice this one when we start thinking about when this is happening? This was result number 2 when I pulled this off yesterday, which was from Search Engine Land, dated on 30th of April 2018. And this was the article. They've already notified 6 weeks ago the first batch of websites that are moving over to the mobile index. So in GSC, a lot of people will have started to see notifications around the need to start thinking mobile. And basically, they've started sending and moving those pages through the process now. A month prior to this, they notified us to kind of say that they were rolling the index out. And basically what they were saying in this on the 30th of April, it means more traffic in your logs will be Googlebot smartphone. They're going to really start penetrating and going hard for the mobile-based optimization side of things. So for you guys, I would say if you haven't seen anything within GSC, some quick things to just go and look at. Typically, 80% of crawling will be done by desktop. It will flip the other way if you look in your log file. Really just go and run it quickly through a log file analyzer, something like logs.io or something which is out there and available in the market. And if you're seeing a flip from 80% desktop and 20% mobile towards this side of things, it means that you have flipped over. Or simply go and click on the cache button and look at which page is being cached. There's a great piece which Rachel, who's speaking on the other stage at the moment, wrote about this. So you can go and grab that on the open web. We're not looking for anything, but it's a really nice roundup of everything there. PWA, for me, is the future. You've got to reinvent yourself in this marketplace. People have already, last year, started talking about PWAs. And this, for me, is the next step forward in AMP and virtually responsive design around mobile. If anything, go away and look at PWAs, because there's not too many people really aware of them yet, or what you can actually do with them. And as I say, when people started talking about this at the back end of last year, I could see very quickly a crescendo towards these things to help in the mobile space. And at the end of the day, if you can't figure all of this out, there's always Bing. There really is. 25% market share now. Perna spoke earlier on today. I'm sure she did a great job as always. 25% market share, that astounded me. So we can't figure this stuff out in Google. Maybe go and have a look at Bing. They do some pretty interesting stuff at the minute. That's all, folks. Thanks very much. That was my 25 minutes, and good to talk to you. Thank you.